Today on Second Nature, we are joined by the R in RXR Sports, Jonathan Retzik. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. Good to see you again.
Like I told you before we started recording the pod, you're one of my dream guests, one of my top 10 people that have been dying to get on the pod. And we've referenced what you've been doing with RXR, what you've been doing with Voicing Change, and now we've convinced you to come in and talk to us on the pod. So I'm really excited for this conversation because I think there's a lot we can kind of dig into. And I mean, you manage one of the most ridiculous rosters in the outdoor community, and to hear directly from you kind of what it looks like to work with all these elite athletes, storytellers, explorers, creators. I mean, there's a lot to go through today, so I'm really looking forward to this conversation.
Yeah, thank you. No, that means a lot. Obviously, you guys are super industry insiders, and to get feedback like that from your peers means a lot.
Let's start with where I guess the right place to start with is RXR. Where was the founding insight? Because I think you'd been an agent already kind of leading into it, and then you launched RXR. What was sort of the founding insight, and how did it begin for you?
Like this is really my life's work, and I think you've got to go kind of like way back to where it all started. Like so I came up in the cycling world. My dad was an amateur cyclist, and like as most kids, like I played all the traditional sports, but like cycling really grabbed hold of me. And this is back in the early 90s and pre Lance Armstrong, cycling was like super niche. Like it was so hard to get like the European magazines to follow the sport back then. It was like you had to be like really, really hardcore. And I fell in love with it and fell in love with you know, the kind of European elegance of it all. And so it like our cars growing up were like we drove like do you know Peugeot?
Oh yeah.
They used to import Peugeots into the United States back in the 90s, and like Peugeot sponsored a bike team. So like we drove a Peugeot. Like we had like Motorola phones because they sponsored a bike team. So like for me, like the like sports marketing is deep. Like it's like a childhood hood thing
Yeah.
that I connected with. And then I had my own racing career as a junior and under 23, and won a bunch of junior national championships and raced on the national team in Europe for a number of seasons. And so that's kind of where I got my exposure to the world of professional sports and sponsorship. And I had an agent briefly during that time. And so I guess that's like where it all starts. And then I went to college, kind of took a break from sports, got interested in the entertainment business, and then I developed all these like professional skills of how to negotiate contracts and put TV and film projects together and sponsorship deals, and then it's kind of evolved.
So when you were kind of starting out and putting those contracts together, was that with athletes or was that with actors and
No,
actresses?
yeah, actors and directors and authors, like all sorts of different types of personalities. Yeah.
But you started at an agency that just got acquired by CAA, which is kind of the big hitter in LA, right? What was that first kind of like? How did you get in the door doing that? Is that sort of like what you went to school for, and then you got in the door there, or did you get like a lucky break to get into this giant uh, agency?
Yeah, so I had kind of a series of internships in college. I was a political science major, but I got really interested in the film business when I was in school. Partly from being an elite cyclist, and in my downtime I just watched a lot of movies, right?
Mhm.
And so like I had this interest in cinema, and then like what kind of going through school, and in my first internship was at Rogers and Cowan, which is one of the, like the top PR firms in Hollywood. And like that was just like, oh, this is super fascinating. And the show Entourage was out at the time. And that
Oh
had
yeah.
like that had a really big effect on me. But I just like loved like the whole like Hollywood kind of machine and industry, and just like read all the books and just got like super into it.
So you're like the Ari of outdoor sports.
Of my world, yeah.
That's pretty incredible. How did you transition from working in this world of like Hollywood to sports then? What was the turning point?
Yeah, so so then after Rogers and Cowan, I got an internship at ICM, and they hired me after I graduated, and it's like classic like Hollywood talent agency story, start at the bottom. I was like a second assistant to Sam Cohn, who's like a really legendary agent. He discovered like Meryl Streep and was Woody Allen's agent, and Paul Newman, and like, I mean, like, talk about a roster. Like Sam was an absolute legend, but it was at like the tail end of his career. But it was such like it was incredible for me as somebody right out of school to like answer the phone and it's like Paul Newman's on the other line, right? Like really really cool. So I got like immersed into that world and just started kind of moving my way up, working in different departments in that agency, and then through some like mutual connections, got connected with like Jimmy Chin and Corey Rich and like a few people in the adventure world. And like the light bulb for me just kind of went off of like, oh, like all this stuff that I'm doing on the weekends, like my love for like outdoor sports and like maybe I could take my professional skills from ICM and apply it to that world, and like let's see what happens, right?
What a perfect fit, Jimmy making films and everything where it's not you didn't necessarily go athlete, athlete, athlete. You found athletes that were creators that were making films and there was a through line there. You can see the background of having this film probably paid off in a more meaningful way than having just only a sports background and just coming in trying to cobble together a roster of athletes on the way up. That's an interesting approach that maybe isn't so common.
Yeah, the storytelling part of it has always been like really at the heart of like my kind of like insight into this world, and like that's why like I flipped over Jimmy was like it's like here you've got this guy who is this incredible athlete going to incredible places all over the world, but he can you know take pictures and he can make movies and he can give a 45-minute keynote. Like that's really unusual in the world of sports to be able to have all those skills.
It's kind of fascinating thinking about how right now we're pushing so many athletes to become content creators as part of their sort of offering. But here you started with somebody who had it figured out 10 or 20 years before anybody else and now has been able to build on that in such a meaningful way that he could do almost anything.
Yeah, and at the time like it was a lot less clear, right? Like um social media was just in its infancy. Branded content was like like Jimmy had just like kind of started Camp 4, and like that relationship with the North Face was really they were doing some really interesting things. um and and then he had like this short film that he was working on called Meru, uh and he's like, I was like, I think I got something here, and just met this girl Chai, and like, she's gonna help out with it, and like, then all of a sudden, they're at Sundance, and like, it really took off.
What was that like in the early days of being an agent, building all this out and speaking with brands and trying to communicate that out? Because even now there's a discussion of like, wait, are they competing or how do we define the value with this partnership? And you were probably one of the first to really be pitching big deals that weren't related to actual competitive outcome. How much of that was just like straight up education from your side, or did you feel like Jimmy had enough of a running start that you didn't need to do as much education? What was that like?
In the beginning, we really had to almost play like consultants for the brands that were like kind of dipping their toe in our space, or I was trying to get in in the door with, right? And like go to, Kiehl's or JP Morgan Chase or, whatever non-endemic brand that we were going to, and like making the case of why, a mountain sports athlete is the right person for their next campaign, right? So I had to talk a lot about like, you know, how these guys transcend their sport. And when you see, a Jimmy Chin or an Alex Honnold photograph of Alex Honnold, like it doesn't matter what language you speak or whether you know anything about rock climbing or alpinism or whatever. Like we can all relate to that person on the mountain and the struggle to go up the mountain and the risks and all that kind of stuff is like universal uh, kind of human experience type stuff. And like just to get deals done, we just like, had to work so hard and give, so much like free insight and stuff away, to get traction.
Was it easier, do you think, approaching non-endemic brands, so brands that aren't in the outdoor industry, to sort of tell that story and to bring them along, where maybe a endemic brand, you know, obviously the North Face has been a big partner for a lot of your athletes, but when you're going within the sport, they have sort of their we like this and we like this, and your person doesn't fit in either one of these buckets, so we don't know what to do. Versus like if you go far enough away, they don't have any sort of structure or framework for a partnership, and you could sell kind of the bigger vision, the bigger story of what they're doing. Do you think that was in a way almost like the easier, more productive path to go with these athletes?
Yeah, sometimes like it really comes down to like who's on the other end of the phone. Like sometimes I'd find a champion at an auto company or whatever, and they just like maybe they're a climber or a cyclist or whatever themselves, and it's like I find that person's like, oh, game on, like they get, they know the roster already, like they totally get this, and then my job is to like arm them with the ammo and the nice decks and all sorts of stuff to like pitch this stuff up the within their organization and get buy-in from others. So sometimes like when I can find that person, it's it can be quite easy. Other times, it's like you really have to knock on the door and work your way in.
You've got this insane roster at RXR. Like, just to list it off, you got Scott Jurek, you got Kate Courtney, Alex Honnold, Jimmy Chin, Kami Caldwell. Like, the lineup of people that you're working with is pretty bonkers, and that's the dream list of athletes and explorers and storytellers of any brand. They would love to have access to all those people. Jimmy obviously was a pretty great place to start, but was there a moment where things kind of unlocked for you? Was it maybe the launch of Meru and people realized like, oh, there's like some secret sauce behind what Jimmy's doing, and everybody kind of clamored to come in? Did you build it kind of piece by piece? Did you have to fight for this roster? How did you build this crew of just elite human beings?
It's been a very steady build over the last. Now we're 11 years old now, so it's and we've really kind of put the roster together piece by piece, and a lot through referrals of Jimmy, being on an expedition with Alex Honnold and Alex being like, wait, Jimmy, you've got this guy that like handles all the stuff that I like don't want to deal with. Like, let me talk to this guy, right? And and then it just like kind of word of mouth and um, with within the communities. So it's been built very kind of slowly and intentionally. Um, and it's also like I think looking for opportunities where the others aren't looking necessarily. Like
Mhm.
none of these guys, like there was no money in any of this when we started, but like for me, it just just kind of I believed in it, and over time we built a real business.
What have been the biggest challenges? You've been around for 11 years, and surely there have been a few roadblocks along the way. What have been the biggest challenges that you've had to kind of face and overcome?
Well, it's a bootstrap business, so like kind of finding the right pace of growth And when, I make a mistake, like even a small mistake, like it hurts, right? And so, just being kind of really really intentional, and when I do make mistakes, whether that's hiring the wrong person or signing the wrong client, and luckily, like, I haven't made we haven't made too many of those. Just learning from them really quickly.
Could you explain a little bit more about RXR? So, how many people are there, and is it all athlete management that you're doing? Are you working with, sort of brand clients as well? What does kind of the business look like for you?
Yeah, sure. So the heart of the business is our talent management uh, function, and so we've got about a basketball sized team of employees that is servicing our roster of what I think 25 clients now, and so we work as a team. We're extremely hands on with our clients. Um, we're really focused and involved in the day to day of kind of every aspect of the business side of of their lives. And so that's working across a number of different deal types. It's brand partnerships are definitely our bread and butter, and those can be multi-year long partnerships, campaigns. We've worked with kind of everybody at this point, from Apple to Rolex to North Face to Patagonia to Samsung, like Goldman Sachs, like you name it. Um, so that's a big part of our business. A lot of our clients also do corporate speaking, and that's kind of a whole other function. Original content, and that's everything from like we're heavily involved in the Climb, the show with our client Chris Sharma, Jason Momoa, Free Solo, um, Meru, the most recent Alex Honnold Arctic Ascent, um, the Devil's Thumb on Nat Geo. So that's a whole part of the business, and then podcasts are within that, um, and then you know our clients are also like investors and entrepreneurs, and looking at launching their own consumer brands and launching their own philanthropic foundations. So we've got our hands in a lot of different things, and that's what keeps it super fun.
How does that look when you're working with an athlete that's incoming, say? Are you doing a lot of mentorship and helping them sort of reorient their business? Maybe somebody came to you with existing sponsors. Kate, for example, was already sponsored by Red Bull, and I was her athlete manager at Red Bull, so she brings athlete sponsorship along with. But then what does the conversation look like with the athlete of like, hey, based on all these other athletes we're working with, this would be an interesting way to sort of orient your business, or let's look at a roadmap. Like, what do those conversations look like? Because I've got to assume that's a big part of the discussion when it comes to working with an athlete. It's not just like, great, sit there and we'll just go get you sponsored. There's deeper discussions happening, right?
Yeah, 100%. I mean, everybody, we kind of have develop bespoke business plans for each one of our clients. They're all different. They've got their own different capabilities. They've got their own different goals. They're in different places in their career, and it's always evolving, right? So it's when we get into a new relationship with a client, we really work hard to try to understand them and get to know them really well, and understand like what's the game they're playing, right? Because like there's a lot of similarities between all of our clients, or we're attracted to certain types of people, but they all have different games that they're playing, right? And if you can understand that game and not like impose our own game on them, right? And figure out how we can be supportive, then that's generally like the path to success.
Have you ever had to like completely rewrite somebody's plan where you listen to what they say and then you think on the strategy and the execution and say like, okay, listen, based on what we know and based on what we do and based on every other comp, you think that you should be doing this, but actually this is the path to success. Like I've got to imagine not every athlete has it figured out and you might be 8 steps ahead of them. What are those conversations like?
Yeah, I mean, there's two sides. Like one, you've got athletes with like a huge ambition, right? And they want to do all these things, and then our job is sort of like, okay, let's take these audacious goals and let's break them down into small chunks. Like, what's the crawl, walk, run, approach here, and really kind of map that out, right? And then the other thing is like. Uh, Athletes that like they're so focused on their craft and they don't care about the business side at all. Talking about Alex Honnold here, and it's like no, like this is within your grasp, or like this this could happen.
That's got to be a difficult balance because the athlete wants to focus so hard on their sport only and you're asking them to do a bunch of other things. Deliverables are, the common gripe from athletes, right? But you also probably have the ability to show them the upside of the effort. And that's got to be a really challenging conversation to sort of balance out.
Yeah, it can be at times, and especially when they're like super laser focused and um we need them to do something because we promised somebody we're going to do something. But most of the time, that's rare. Like we've got such a good dialogue going, and we know that like whether Kate's preparing for the World Championships or we just signed Chelsea Sodaro, and she's going to try to win Kona again, and it's like all right, we know going into Kona like nobody's talking to Chelsea. She is locked in and doing her thing.
I'd love to talk about that a little bit more. Big fan of Chelsea. She's the homie and she's awesome. What is the what are you thinking about when you sign a new athlete, when you bring talent on board? Because you've got such a stacked roster. What does that look like from the RXR side of thing? And then also, what are the things that you're looking for when you want to consider growing that roster? Because I've got to imagine it's nearly impossible at this stage to get into that roster.
Well, yeah, I mean, we've got a process for how we evaluate new talent. And like the fundamentals are like, do we admire and respect this person, right? Like that's that's just like table stakes for like, new clients, new employees, like, you know, everybody in the RXR orbit, we want to work with people that we admire and we respect, right? So that's fundamental to a good working relationship. I think other things I'm looking for, like I want to see like a really strong intrinsic drive, right? And people like I like people that are like super passionate, like obsessive about their craft, right? And obviously you don't become a world champion or free solo El Cap or you know make movies or whatever without like being obsessive and extremely driven. But I definitely looking for that because it helps make the business stuff is secondary, right? It's just like it's all bonus, when you see talent that is just so like for them the victory is the endorsement deal or what the big New York Times article or whatever, and that's what it's about, then it's like, do I really want to work with that for the next 10 years? I don't know, and it's not that our clients don't want all those things and they've got ambitions for those things, but like that's not the point, it's like it's all that's all just like the icing.
It does seem like the idea is really to sort of enable that athlete to do their best work by finding the right partners that are sort of congruent with where they're headed. And the more congruent you can make that, the easier it is for that athlete or adventurer or explorer to do what they're meant to be doing, right?
That's right.
The question I want to ask, and I've been dealing with this a fair bit too, because I feel like you could potentially pitch a hundred brands for an athlete. How do you figure out when is like what is enough when it comes to an athlete? Because you could go to town with Jimmy, Alex, Kate, who Chelsea, right? She could have like 50 sponsors, and you probably could figure out a way to squeeze that many deliverables out of any athlete, but what is the determining factor for you and like when it's enough? Because you probably have a couple extra irons in the fire in case one falls off or whatever else. How you kind of manage that process and what's sort of your thought process around the right number of partners for an athlete?
Well, again, it comes down to like really good communication with that athlete to see how are they feeling, how's the current workload, on their training life, on their family life, like how many, like we see it like they're getting on a plane all the time. We know they got to train or they're writing a book or whatever, and it's like, oh, it's a lot of it's a lot of work. So we're really like extremely sensitive to that workload, and every new opportunity, we're evaluating like, hey, what are the deliverables versus the pay? If we do this, that means we get to say no to a bunch of other things. um, our pricing is definitely like super dynamic. Like, if somebody's really busy, like, Jimmy Chin has two movies that year, like, well, you know, we're not we're not doing anything for less than a certain amount, like just because he's got a lot on their plate. But I would say that, like, we try to find like four to six like long term kind of foundational partners is generally good for each athlete, but it varies.
So recently, you had to kind of reset and rebuild an entire program for Kate Courtney, the She Sends Racing program, which is based on her foundation, which is sort of like a new model in the athlete and factory racing world. Mountain biking is going through all kinds of fun stuff right now, which I'm sure you've had all kinds of time to deal with. But Kate had this longtime sponsor, and she decided like, hey, I'm gonna race for myself now. I want my focus to be on my foundation. This is the actual thing that's the most important, that I drive people to this so that we can get more women and girls on bikes. I want to put all my effort into this. I'm sure the first phone call was to you to say, okay, I want to change everything. Can you help me build a factory racing program with a legitimate partner structure that will be able to afford to have all the elements that I've been getting through this bigger factory team? Now I want to own all of that in house. What was actually, I'd love to know, what was it like getting that phone call? Because I can't imagine there are a lot of other athletes on your roster like, hey, Jonathan, cancel everything. I want to start over.
Well, I've been working with Kate since 2018, right after she won World. So you were there a few years before that. But we've been working together a long time, so we know each other well, and obviously just adore her as a human being. In addition to being an incredible world class athlete, and when she had the idea to do this, it just made sense. It was the right time. I mean, she had set herself up to do it, and I wouldn't have said that this is a good idea for a bunch of for other racers on the World Cup scene. Like, I think Kate was in a really unique position, has a unique skill set. The way she has handled uh, both her wins and her losses with like such grace, right, and built like such equity within her fan community, that like it really wasn't that crazy to be like, all right, we're gonna go out and talk to a bunch of brands, and we're gonna have to ask them to take a leap of faith on her vision. Um, and what we did, we created this deck, and uh, on the first page of the deck is a video of Kate talking about the program because nobody can. I can't pitch Kate as well as Kate can pitch Kate, right?
Mhm.
And so like we have this like very hooky video, and then the next step was like get them on with Kate, just get them on a Zoom with Kate, and Kate will sell it. And we did that, and we got traction really quickly. Rivian was like a big first lead domino to fall, you know, and RJ like believed in the project, and and then we Kate was we were working with Kate to make lists of all of her favorite brands and who do you want to work with, who do you think would be a good partner and like it would buy in on this, and then we went after them one by one.
Rivian's such an interesting one on top of everything else that you put together because there haven't been car sponsors or truck sponsors or anything like that in the world of mountain biking since
Yeah,
like 1998.
yeah,
So you brought back car sponsorship to mountain biking. Thank you for that as a mountain biker myself.
yeah.
That's an exciting thing. And it makes total sense that there should be that level of partnership and that kind of engagement. What does that look like though? Because obviously Kate has a massive Instagram following, but content is such a big role. And like we were just talking about, the ability for someone to be able to deliver on all these asks and deliverables for that kind of stuff. Are you thinking again, like you have to go back to the drawing board when it comes to Kate's program, not just like, okay, keep doing the same thing, new sponsors. Are you thinking about sort of the business of what it's going to take to retain these partners and kind of rethinking everything at that stage? How does that conversation go?
It's totally different. Like you know, um, the way that we're designing this, the deliverables, the way that Kate's so much more involved as than she would be if she was with the factory program. Like she is working with the marketing departments. Like I don't know if you saw that event we did in San Francisco at one of the new Rivian retail locations. Like Kate's right in there with the marketing team designing what that's going to look like, from who the ride leaders are to what donuts or coffee they're going to have, like. So yeah, she's super involved in everything, and it's super cool. It's also super cool to be able to go to a brand and be like, look, this is the team. Like if we come up with a good idea on this Zoom, like we can just do it, right? And we can move super fast. And um, so like when you look at these partnerships, like we've got there's a structure to it, but it's not overly structured, right? Because we want it to be a real partnership that's agile, that can like adapt to the brand's needs and to Kate's needs, and there's like a really good dialogue.
That's so cool. I'm excited to see how this whole thing kind of evolves. And I've got Kate lined up for a future podcast too. So we're definitely gonna, kick some ideas around with her and hear what she's got to say and stuff. But I think it really sort of redefined what's possible in mountain biking when she released that, because to race for your own foundation with partnerships that are non-endemic, I mean that is a huge step forward. And I think a lot of people will probably try to at least chase that structure for their own stuff in the future. It may take a lot longer to get to that point, but I think you've done something that sort of pushes people to think outside of the box when it comes to what partnerships look like. And it's really interesting to me just overall where you're saying kind of went away from the sports specific stuff and into the non-endemic world to find people where telling kind of the bigger story of that athlete fits into their campaign instead of just like, cool, sports brand X, I'm gonna race on your product this season, and then win or lose, but we'll be there, and it'll be on this podium, and it'll be in this Instagram post. Like you've gone up on a different level, but so much of like what athletes do translates in theory, but doesn't translate when it comes to like, yeah, no one at JP Morgan probably cares about any sort of race detail whatsoever. They want to know probably more about the viewership or the audience or the content that's being created, the deliverables that they can offer, the keynote speaking. Actually, I want to hear a little bit more about this keynote thing. Is that something that you're obviously Jimmy's capable of doing it, but I know on the RXR site you kind of have a list of all the different speakers that could come out and do that. Can you talk a little bit more about, how that works, and are you kind of helping them get to that point where they are capable speakers? Are you opening doors? What does that look like for an athlete to go on a speaking tour?
It's kind of a line of business that kind of everybody wants to do because it can be honestly like for time for dollar like the most lucrative and but it's really hard to break into. Like it's really hard to get on stage in front of 500 people, 1,000 people, and command their attention for 45 minutes, right? And so, you talk about crawl, walk, run, like, like Alex, Jimmy, Rich Roll, Scott Jurek, Emily Harrington is a great corporate speaker. Um, Jason Caldwell. I mean, these guys they all started small, right? And they built up to it. And we try to set them up for success. We're not going to go after the 45-minute keynote right away. Like let's do a fireside chat. Let's get on a panel. Like let's just get them comfortable. And then you know word of mouth builds or somebody in they're maybe speaking at JP Morgan Chase, but there's somebody in the audience from I don't know Goldman or some cloud computing company or whatever, and like they're like, oh, I want to bring them to my corporate conference. So it builds on itself, and you just gotta like start small and try to like you know carefully like you know work with them to level up over time.
That's so cool. We used to do that at Red Bull where we'd bring an athlete in to speak to distribution or speak to a business unit or whatever. And I always used to push Dylan on them. Like the corollary between running 100 miles and the long-term business stuff, like you could have a field day with speaking engagements if you really wanted to, because he's got so many stories from races where maybe he was counting himself out and then he came back to life in the last little bit and then won the race. There's so many ways you could make that work in a corporate setting, but yeah.
The takeaways are just like so obvious. Like and you got to remember that a lot of these corporate conferences, like all the talks before you are super dry and boring, and it's like, and so when our guys come out on stage, like they're the entertainment, they're the fun, and to hear Alex talk about like, hey, here's my audacious goal, and here's how I broke it down, like everybody's like, oh, like like they can see the takeaways to how that applies to their own business.
I can imagine people are ready to climb a mountain or run through a brick wall after hearing that guy speak.
Yeah. So it's fun. I love going and attending. Obviously, they happen all over the world and stuff, but when they happen in New York, I always love to go and see. It's inspiring to hear them.
I really want to go down a ritual rabbit hole with you if we can. So obviously, Voicing Change Media, you co-founded, you're the CEO of, but I'd love to back up just a little bit because you've been working with Rich for a pretty long time. Obviously, he's the host of one of the most successful podcasts in the world. He's a runner. He does all kinds of stuff. He's written books. How did your relationship start with Rich, and what did that look like?
I started working with Rich about similar time to when we started working with Kate, 2018, and the podcast was really starting to get traction at that point, and certainly in our like endemic world of like endurance sports and stuff, like Rich, which was really building a brand, and the show was really building a following, and we were brought in to really help him develop brand partnerships, corporate speaking, everything kind of outside of the podcast. And then over time, it just made sense for our team to kind of take over the podcast management as well. And that's how we got deep into the podcast business.
Very cool. How was it in the early days of those discussions? Because I feel like podcasting, probably there's a numbers discussion from listeners and viewership and stuff like that, but your conversations were probably about more than that. It wasn't a volume play. It was about finding alignment between partners who actually fit Rich as an athlete beyond the podcast, and the podcast was probably an element of his stuff. What was that discussion like when you were bringing him to people and trying to get that across the line?
Yeah, well, I think, I mean, this is universal to, like, it applies to Rich and it applies to like everything that RXR invoicing change does. Is like our the talent that we represent are influential people in these like really kind of niche communities, right? And so much of what we're communicating to brand partners of why this is a good investment is like the power of our niche, right? And how committed these fans are, right? And it's like it's different if you're a Rich Roll listener versus like a Conan O'Brien listener, and like, I love Conan, but like it's just different. Like you are much more bought in, and there's a power in that, right? When Rich recommends a book or a movie or a product, like you know, it, that's powerful, right? And so that's what we're trying to convince or communicate to brand partners.
I feel like that's the struggle over here at Second Nature. We have like the Davos panel of the outdoor industry listening to the podcast. The quality of listener, the engagement of the people that listen to this podcast are all time. It's not about the volume of people listening to it. It's about the quality of people listening to it. And I think trying to communicate that to potential partners still something that we're a little hung up on, of finding the right partners that can actually appreciate and value that appropriately. Because I think there's two different ways to talk about that when it comes to podcasts.
Yeah, like because if you're a media buyer, and especially at a big brand like I don't know BetterHelp or Squarespace or whatever, like they can buy impressions anywhere, right? Like they've got everybody pitching them, and they can get reach. Yeah, and so how do we differentiate ourselves? Like how are we different, right? And that's like talking about the quality of our audience. What's that profile look like? Um, and um, yeah, hopefully you can, you know, differentiate yourself with all against everybody else.
The struggle is real, but yeah, we're committed. It's all good. We have a we've got 82 episodes going strong, and we're not stopping anytime soon. So thankfully that's not the reason why we make this podcast. We make this podcast because we love nerding out about the stuff that you and I are talking about right now. But yeah, finding the right partners, and I've got to imagine that's probably your main challenge too. Of like, there are plenty of people out there. I'm sure the inbound requests for Alex Honnold are just ridiculous. But who are the people that are the right fit? Who are the right partners that understand and value Alex appropriately, as opposed to him being a reach play?
Look, I think for you guys, like you've got a lot of outdoor, sports marketing executives listening to the show. Like those are hard people to get in front of. You know, we're busy people, right? And so like if you can hold their attention for an hour or 2 hours, like there's real value there.
I'd love to talk a little bit more about voicing change, because that was actually the second episode of the podcast. And we got a message from Rich right after. I don't know if it's actually Rich or not, but someone who runs his YouTube account commented on it, which was pretty cool for us, validating that episode 2 got listened to somebody in Rich's orbit. Pretty cool for us.
I bet I guarantee you that was Rich. Yeah.
That's pretty cool. What was sort of the founding insight there? Because you collected a handful of people that already had podcasts and you started a few new ones from there. A lot of times, like, there's a big trend happening right now. Slow Ventures just announced a big creator fund where, people are showing up to people that have audiences and trying to invest. And I've got to imagine probably one of the best places to put that would be like, well, let's just take what this person does and amplify it. And one thing that Rich does really well is, you know, host these really interesting conversations with meaningful people. And so if you were going to maximize that, you would, you know, try to build out a network. And that's sort of what we see. I don't actually, know any of the details, but I think that was a really smart step forward for Rich, what he's done, and then how to expand on that without Rich hosting 6 podcasts or whatever. So where were you kind of thinking about voicing change, and how did it kind of evolve to the point where you launched it as a full on network? And how did you think about that mix of kind of incoming podcasts and starting new ones?
When we uh, got involved in running the podcast side or the ad sales part of the podcast, Rich's podcast business, we were able to help scale the show quite a bit. And, we're kind of reflecting on, what we had just accomplished over that last year, that, kind of first year or so. Uh, Rich was like, look, you know, I think there are a lot. I have a lot of friends that host shows that could use this kind of help, right? And so we really design the business and our services kind of from Rich's perspective as a creator of like, because he started it, over 10 years ago, bootstrapped. I mean, he did everything for years, right? And so he knows all the pain points of what it's like being a creator, getting a show off the ground, right? And so, we really sat down and with Greg, our business partner, and who's the CEO of the Ritual Podcast, and really try to kind of design services to take out some of the really tough pain points of running your own show, and allowing these shows to stay independent, right? That was really kind of important to Rich, that it's still his own show. Editorially doesn't have to answer to anybody. It's his IP, right? Like, and so we kind of built the business around his insights.
So you're really helping out with a lot of the administration and sort of the back end of all these different podcasts so that they can continue doing what they do just on a higher level. And how do you see sort of the growth of the network? Is it acquisition to bring more podcasts kind of in the circle? Is it sort of doubling down on production for each one of the podcasts? Like, what does the future of voicing change look like?
Yeah, I think we will continue to partner with existing independent shows in different verticals, right? Like the start of voicing change is very. I mean, like, I guess the connective tissue between the shows is kind of personal development, right? I think that will really broaden over time, and because like you we like I could see us evolving into having comedy shows or like a cooking show or whatever, but but there's always going to be that like high bar of quality and kind of that like ritual sensibility. Like Rich is our curator in chief, right? And um I think over time it'll grow. Things like personal finance, kind of addiction and recovery. There's so many topics out there where people like podcasts can be really helpful to people in kind of getting them through, whether it's organizing your personal finances or dealing with addiction and recovery issues, or like we brought on Dr. Lisa Damore, and her Ask Lisa show is a parenting podcast that, like me as a father of young girls, like I listen to it all the time for parenting advice.
How is it going? I mean, you've had voicing change a year in now, roughly, right? I think it would launch last March or April. Um, how is it going in kind of the first year? Is it kind of meeting your expectations? Is it too early to tell? How are you feeling about the direction that it's gone since launch?
I would say it's going quite well. I mean, I think we over this last year, we've demonstrated like good product market fit. We are we've seen like really good growth both in listenership and in revenue for a lot of our different shows. Uh, we have advertisers that keep coming back, right? So they seem to be getting what they need out of it. Um, and then like, we're building like a really badass team. And everybody's having fun, and like, we're hiring two new roles right now, so we're, continuing to kind of put the pedal to the metal. I would say the biggest swing is we just opened a new studio. It's about 5 minutes down the road from Rich's current studio in Westlake Village. And it's this incredible facility where we can have four shows record out of there. There's a 65 person seat theater, so we're going to be having all sorts of like, you can go and watch a live Rich Roll taping, right? So we're going to be able, that space is really going to enable our creators to like level up.
That's so cool. Yeah, live podcasting is such a cool thing, and to be able to capture that appropriately with people in the audience, and what a cool way to offer that up to people that are able to go. That's gonna be awesome.
What's really fun about it is like, you've got Rainn Wilson, Baratunde Thurston, Rich Roll, Alexi Pappas, like all sharing a space. Like that's where they go to work,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
And so they're like hanging out at the water cooler, comparing notes, like listening to each other's stuff. Like, I, that to me is like, that kind of collaboration within the network is super exciting, and especially because like a lot of like creator led media, you know guys are like lone wolves out there, right? And to be able to collaborate with your peers, get feedback, I think is only going to like elevate the game for everybody.
That level of collaboration too, where they're on each other's podcasts or highlighting what the other one's doing on their podcast, has got to just kind of raise all the boats as well, right? You can put any of your other hosts on Rich's podcast or bring Rich onto one of theirs, or the ability for each one of them to kind of put the thumb on the scale for everyone else in the network has got to be a pretty huge advantage when it comes to having a network like that, and sort of the advantages also that you could leverage when you're talking to a partner where you have five or six different podcasts to be able to put it on. It goes from like high value audience plus a sizable amount of people as well, so it's sort of like checks both boxes when it comes to having those partnership discussions.
It's super cool, and it's cool that it's just like that collaboration just happens organically. It's not like in their deals. It's like, oh, you have to like,
Mhm.
plug this X amount of time. It's like there's none of that. Like, these guys are all just like, you get them in the same room, and just good stuff is gonna happen, right? And they promote each other's stuff. They collaborate. It's just, it's really fun to see. So, you know, looking back a year in, that we've got that kind of that good stuff happening, uh, is really exciting.
That's so cool. I'm excited to see. I mean, a year in, people always say they overestimate what they can do in a year and underestimate what they can do in five. So, I mean, you're about to cross the 1 year mark and already feeling good about it. Feels like a great place to be. And podcasting as a space, such a cool, special thing. And to be able to have those conversations, to host them, and to put the right people in the places to bring those conversations to life, I think is such an important thing, and I think that's why we were so excited about it and why we covered it so early on in our podcast library, I guess, for lack of a better term. I mean, content development, content creation is such a big element of what you've been doing your entire career, from the Hollywood agent days into Jimmy Chin and everything like that. What are the other trends that you're sort of seeing that a lot of your athletes are starting to kind of dig into, or you're paying attention to?
There's a lot of demands on on athletes these days, right? Like, it's such an incredible time, because like they have so much more power, so many more opportunities. They can be like, entrepreneurs, investors, philanthropists, creators. Like, um, I was at Can Lion in June, and it was so cool to see like, Megan Rapinoe and Sue Bird were there, Michaela Schifrin, Kelsey Brothers, like, and all these high profile athletes, like, they all had their own podcasts. They all were like developing their own consumer brands. Like, they're like hustling. Sean White was, was there talking about his new snowboard league. Like, it's so cool. But at the same time, it's like it's also super overwhelming, right? And um, I think athletes certainly feel a pressure that they've got to be kind of all these things, right? And finding out like what's the right thing for each person, um, I think is kind of like the secret in the sauce, and then having the right team around them to help them kind of navigate, the wiles of business, and outside of their craft, where is the best areas for them to put their time and energy, right? Like we're always looking for like what are those like high impact things that you can, what is the highest impact thing that you can be focused on?
I think a trend that I want to see happen is the emergence of this operator class, people that can come in and be credible, useful partners to these athletes to help them accomplish these goals. Because, like you said, there's so many demands on these athletes, but the opportunity is so large for the ones that can execute. But again, if you do this over here, you can't do that over there. And so I think athletes finding these operators who could help them come bring a vision to life, whether it comes to managing a business or a content empire or anything else, that group of people, I don't think have raised their hands in a meaningful way to the athletes that are trying to figure it out. And maybe that's, I mean, like we talked about earlier in this pod, you guys have given a lot of sort of mentorship to the athletes that are on your roster, but maybe the next step of that is like, hey, this person can come in and operate this business and this business and this business for you. And thinking about the upside of what that might look like could be really interesting. And I think across all sports and creators in general that are trying to uncover this, but it's not their zone of genius. There are so many operators out there who that is within their zone of genius, but making the connection between the two is sort of the struggle right now. And it's a trend that I just want to see happen. I want to see more people make that connection. And I don't know necessarily how to facilitate that, but I hope that something clicks at some point.
Yeah, I mean, it's something that I think a lot about as we're scaling RXR and voicing change, and the hiring that we're doing, and the kind of career development that's happening within our own team, right? And you know, well, one, I hope these guys stay with me for a really long time, and we grow together. But there's all sorts of opportunities that we're creating, right? Like, someday she sends may need a CEO, right, like, and it could be a natural progression that somebody from my team goes and runs that business with Gabe,
Yeah.
right? And so I think a lot about that, like kind of development of not just athlete talent, but kind of that operator talent, right? And how do we create the environment for those stars to rise and just keep expanding the pie with new ventures and new opportunities.
This is exactly why we listed your director of partnerships for Voicing Change Media as the job of the century, because the ability to go in there and work with those hosts, but also create those partnerships and having access to both the talent as well as the opportunity is going to create somebody who's just crushing it when it comes to operations and partnerships, and the opportunities that exist within sort of your ecosystem are massive. Hence, job of the century. And I think, yeah, you've sort of created this really cool environment where people can come in and become successful and build such a cool portfolio of projects that aren't just sell sponsorship, but like build meaningful things that actually impact the world at large. And it could be, yeah, working with Alex on a charity thing, with Kate on this team over here on voicing changes podcast. Like, there's so many different ways where you could make a real impact as part of RXR. And
Yeah, I mean that partnerships job is like it's an ad sales job, but it's not, right? Like that that person is going to be empowered to really kind of be on the forefront of shaping what like creator led partnerships look like,
yeah,
right? Like that's the expectation, right? So you're not just like filling in inventory, but like you're coming up with with ideas, with insights, and like, you know, let's find really interesting ways to go deep with our audience, to work with our brand partners in really like authentic ways. You know.
I mean, that feels like RXR in a nutshell, right? Like just do things that are meaningful and in authentic ways with the best people in the world.
That's what we're trying to do.
Amazing. Well, we usually end every podcast with a segment we like to call BPC, which stands for brand product content. And since you're the guest, I'm gonna let you go first.
All right. Well, mine's gonna be content because that's been a theme here. So a new addition to the Voicing Change roster is Shane Parrish. He's got a show called The Knowledge Project, which everybody should check out, especially if you're more business focused. But I've been reading Shane's content. He has a newsletter called Farnham Street, um, and it comes out every Sunday. He's got multiple books, and so I'm going to recommend The Great Mental Models by Shane Parrish. Like, I've read pretty much everything that he's put out, and a couple of months ago, Rich and Shane bumped into each other at the Spotify Creators conference, and they got to talking. And Rich told him about voicing change, and next thing you know, this guy that like I've like been obsessed over is now part of the network, and I'm like super jazzed. It's just like it's so fun when like somebody that you're like so personally passionate about what they do, you get to work with them now in a professional capacity. So we're trying to crush it for Shane right now.
That's cool. That book is now officially next on my list, and I'm sure Ming is going to put it in this Second Nature Slack channel's book list as
Yeah,
well.
so there's 4 volumes. You could even start with his book Clear Thinking, which is kind of like an overview of mental models, and then read that, and then get into the deep cuts, and that's the 4 volumes.
Very cool. Very cool. All right, my BPC is, gosh, I'm not even sure what category this falls in, but the hat that I'm wearing right now was a gift from Drew Hartman, who runs a channel called Small Brand Mentality. And this is the logo for Small Brand Mentality. And sort of the ethos of it is that he was having this. Oh, by the way, Drew is the sports and community marketing manager at Solomon, which was actually one of our original job of the weeks way back in the early days. So we're going to take a little bit of credit for it. Maybe that's why I have this hat on right now. But Drew sent me this hat, and what I think is so cool about small brand mentality is he was thinking about this idea of how we always talk about playbooks for stuff. And a lot of people are talking about, oh, what's the small brand playbook? What does the challenger brand playbook look like? And he was talking to people, and he landed on this opinion that the small brand playbook, it's just not a magic bullet because it evolves so quickly and it's so intrinsically tied to the small brand. But the small brand mentality is the style of thinking that holds value. So he says in his post, this may seem like a non-answer or a wishy-washy waffling of definition, but it's a journey of refining and nurturing the definition and mindset over time. So I think just like the idea of it, but also I'm really hyped on this little hat here as well. But there's a lot of people doing so many interesting things when it comes to Substack or sending out newsletters. You referenced another newsletter, and it's just so fun now that we have access to so many great minds, and I'm really excited. Drew has this day job at Solomon doing interesting stuff over there, and now we get to hear a little bit of like the mentality behind all of that as well. So Solomon is obviously not a small brand, but what Drew has done, he came up at Tracksmith and he's done all these other things. We're going to get him on the pod here pretty soon too. I just love the fact that you can get these sort of unfiltered takes from people that have had lots of experience in the industry, and they're kind of sharing it now in newsletter format. So I'm repping it today.
Yeah, no, we definitely need curators in the ocean of content that we're in. And you guys are doing a great job.
Well, Jonathan, thank you so much. This was everything I hoped it would be, and I'm just so excited to have sort of a front row seat to what you've been doing all these years, and really excited for this next phase and what's to come.
Yeah, appreciate it. Thanks for having me on, and we'll definitely be keeping you guys up to speed with what we're up to next.
Awesome.